This morning's readings are so rich, it's hard to know which of the three you should preach on. And I've tried this once or twice, it's not recommended to try to preach on all three. It gets to be a little complicated. But certainly we have a wonderful connection between the first reading and the last reading in the sense of seeing Jesus and recognizing who Jesus really is, following him. The conversion of Saul on the road to Damascus is one of the most dramatic accounts in the Acts of the Apostles. But then we also have this absolutely exquisite passage in John, which I had a little bit of fun reading to you in a little more dramatic form. I'm always touched deeply by this because if those times when there's a papal funeral, the cedar casket that is laid in front of either outside or before the high altar, on the top of the cedar casket is the book of the Gospels is open. It is open to this passage. In a marvelous sense of symbols, and Simon Peter, the successor to Peter, is then the questions that are asked of him in the Gospel. So I thought this morning we might take a little time and go through this wonderful passage from John, a little bit of interactive Bible study. Every once in a while a passage comes along that I think if you walk through it, you learn so much more, and this is one of them. So a few things to get our biblical thinking hats going, a few points. Number one is that John's Gospel actually ends in 3 places. Believe it or not. It ends in 3 places. Now, last week, you don't have to admit if you weren't here last week, you could pretend you were, but last week we heard Doubting Thomas. Remember, second study, and what was the end of the Gospel last week? Well, it was the end. Now, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. Well, at some point, another author added to John's Gospel. There are copies of John's Gospel that ends where it supposedly ends, except we pick up again this week with yet another ending to John's Gospel. Last week, who was rescued from doubt and unbelief? Thomas. This week, who is rescued from doubt and unbelief? Peter. Right. So Peter's story is a little more complicated. So at some point, another author decided to extend the resurrection appearances one more time and bring Peter into the story, which tells us that this is written at a time when Peter is beginning to assume leadership in the church, and he's going to be brought back into the good graces of Jesus. That's why it says this was the 3rd time that Jesus appeared to the disciples, twice for Thomas and once now here. But then there's another secondary ending, that is the whole story of Simon Peter is another addition to this. These are 2 pieces put together. What do Simon Peter and Thomas have in common? Doubt, right. And in Peter's case, the ante was upped by what? Denial, yes. Active denial. Thomas just had doubts, but probably was too afraid to admit them. Peter gave in to fear and denied Jesus. And they're both restored by Jesus' intuition. That's the other piece. Jesus intuits that Thomas has doubts when he appears the second time to Thomas, and Jesus now kind of figures out that, here's Peter. But it's even richer when we go along. This is a very human Jesus in this passage. Very human. And the sense of feeling. John's Gospel is the grandest and the least emotional of the 4. John's Gospel tells you the story of a majestic Jesus that goes triumphantly to his death. There's no Father forgive them. There's no agony in the garden. It's finished. And once in a while, his humanity breaks through. He weeps at the tomb of Lazarus. There is the intimacy of Mary anointing his feet, which we heard here. And now we have this wonderful interaction with Peter, bringing Peter back into the fold. So it starts off with, of course, the disciples are fishermen. We have a fishing story, don't we? Does it sound familiar? It should. You're smart people. We heard it this year, actually, in its original form. You heard it at annual meeting. Now, remember annual meeting? There was a lot you heard. So you may have blotted it out a little bit. But what was the gospel at annual meeting? Luke chapter 5, the miraculous catch of fish. The two boats, remember, and the net's so full, and they have to get assistance, and they drag it in, and Jesus said, you haven't got any fish, right? Well, go out and try again. See? That's the original story. And the writer of the ending of John had access to Luke's gospel and included this story, but changed it a little bit to fit what he was talking about. That's another point about the Gospels. They all share each other's materials because this is before the days of plagiarism and multi-million-dollar lawsuits because you violated copyright. Nobody thought anything about this. The idea of borrowing material is considered a compliment if you went and took someone else's story and polished it up and put it in your own account. So the miraculous catch of fish is borrowed and put into this story about Simon Peter. John has no Last Supper. John has no Eucharist. John has the washing of the feet. But John includes the feeding of the 5,000, another miracle common to the Gospels. And what was the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000? Anybody recall that one? Actually, let me see. Second window back on that side, the middle three lancets, the middle three windows. Be sure to check it out on your way. That's the miracle of feeding of 5,000. It's in that window. You can see it. There's the baskets of bread, and there are a few fish skeletons, because at the feeding of the 5,000, it was the miracle of the loaves and of the fishes. The early Christians had no communion service. They ate bread and fish at their meals, and the fish was a symbol of Christianity. Up until about the 3rd century. Then the cross emerges. But that would have been very well known to the readers of this story. The listeners of this story would have gotten it. So that's why it's in here. That is why it is in here. But there's one other brilliant stroke in how this story is told. And it goes by very quickly. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. There is one earlier reference to the charcoal fire in John's Gospel. Does anyone know where it is? Because it's hidden away. We don't hear it very often. This is the passion of Jesus in John's Gospel just before he appears before the high priest in chapter 18.
The guards have a fire.
Yes, I think I have a winner here in the congregation. Yes, exactly. Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter was standing outside the gate. So the woman, standing outside of the gate. Now the slaves and the police had made a charcoal fire because it was cold and warming themselves. Peter was also standing with them and warming himself. So it's the beach. It's dawn, reminiscent of Easter Day. Jesus is at the charcoal fire. They've just shared the bread and the fish, and they're warming themselves. And Jesus just casually says, Peter, do you love me? And Peter wasn't the brightest bulb in the box. it took him a while, and he probably, like I said, oh yeah, Jesus, I love you. One more time. Peter, do you love me? Sure, I love you. Peter, do you love me? And that's when Peter, afraid of what he heard, because what finally happened? He's back at the charcoal fire in the courtyard, denying Jesus 3 times. The 3 questions, Simon Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep, are the reversals of his 3 denials on that night when he in fact did deny Jesus. Except now it is dawn, it is Easter, Jesus is alive, and Jesus knows Peter can live again despite his lack of faith. He can be restored to wholeness and life. And that's how the gospel ends. Because as it says, just a little later on, there are also many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. The final ending to John's Gospel. There are so many stories of so much healing and so much redemption that yes, the world is so full of books, we run out of space for them all, from the abundant love of Jesus Christ. It is a brilliant passage because it's so subtle and so beautiful and so forgiving. Stephen Charleston, the retired bishop of Alaska, wrote this about the end of John's Gospel and this boundless capacity of Jesus to love even those who have betrayed him. Can I offer just one reason for why I'm hopeful about our future? Yes, I think I can. It is because love is stronger than we are. We can deny that we feel it, but love still finds us, even in our most secure hideout. We can say love is over for us, only to have it return in its own good time. We can pretend it is only for the few in our lives until we turn the corner and meet a stranger who changes our mind. We may spend our lives trying to control love, but we never can. Love is as constant, eternal, and certain in our future as the first day we discovered it. There is no tomorrow where it cannot find us again. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, I will always love you. In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer,